وصلى الله على محمد وآله وصحبه ومن والاه. Our short khatira today, inshallah, is the first ayah, or a couple of the first ayah that he was mentioning. He talked about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, talking about what Allah akhada min Adama. He took from Adam, from the back of Adam, ذريتهم وأشهدهم على خلقهم ألست بربكم على أنفسهم ألست بربكم قالوا بلى. He took from Adam, that's literally the meaning, so from his back, his dhurriya, his offspring, and they made them testify against themselves. Am I not your Lord? قالوا بلى. They said yes. Now, al-Mufassirin, they really went right and left in this. It's difficult to find, what do you mean? What do you mean Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took the oath from the offspring of Adam and they testified that Allah is their Lord? No one remembers that. Not a mu'min, not a kafir, nobody remembers that he testified. Do you remember? Anybody remembers? So consciously we don't remember. Then so some of the Mufassirin said, no, this is only the immediate dhurriya of Adam. The immediate offspring of Adam. Or Adam and his immediate offspring. Maybe. Or maybe it is really the souls that testified of the dhurriya of Adam. Adam alayhi salam's dhurriya, offspring, the souls all testified that their creator is Allah, and they remained on that testimony, and therefore the human being makeup is soul, ruh, mind, aql, and then jism, body. And therefore the soul or ar-ruh is always ulwi. Ulwi means superior. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلُ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. They ask you about the ruh. The ruh is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. And that's why ruh, mind and body, and the ruh is the lightest density. And the body is the heaviest density, and the mind is in the middle. As if the ruh is always in the state of purity, since it admitted and testified to Allah that you are my Lord and I submit entirely to you. And therefore you really have no control over your ruh. It's not, though it is part of you, but you have no control over it. You can't control it. Because the mind, your mind, cannot control the ruh, can only control the body. And therefore, you live as long as the ruh is there. Once Allah wills for that ruh to go back, as if the ruh is your battery. It's just keeping you alive. The mind and then the body. The mind is in control. Allah gave the mind control over the limbs or the body. The problem is sometimes the mind, which is supposed to be channeling or facilitating that connection with the ruh, with the soul, so that human being becomes Rabbani, ulwi rather than sufli. Sometimes the mind itself becomes the barrier from the limbs acting Rabbani or Ruhani with the ruh. And therefore they act more jismani, they act more in the lower, and therefore in the lower form, and therefore they commit all these things. The mind itself gives that conscious decision that Allah gave the mind that window of choice, and the mind uses that sometimes to become the barrier between the soul and the limbs. In all states, the soul, the mind, and the jism, the body, they themselves as an entity are doing tasbih to Allah. What I'm saying is, even when your limb is doing sin, the actual cells in your limbs are doing tasbih to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then the control, the voluntary control, is coming from the mind. And that's the problem, where the mind takes the whole body hostage to its decision that it makes if it's separated from the soul. And to that meaning, the hadith come and say, استفتي قلبك. When people give you fatwas, but also check your heart. It doesn't mean that you become an auto mufti. Well, money, nowadays it's just no problem. لا لا لا. It means that the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is something that the ruh accepts without argument almost. It's natural with the ruh because it's ulwi, it's superior. And it's Rabbani. It's never mixed with anything else. And therefore, there is no need for you to rationalize its goodness, it's good. Versus the mind always intellectualizes and rationalizes evil. The ruh tells you, even when you're doing something wrong, there's that little subdued voice. It's wrong. Don't do it. But then you intellectualize. You throw a couple of hadith that you twist around, and you say, this is what it is. But the ruh is always there, notice? And the ruh is always that line that gives you, that tries to connect you to heavens, versus the mind, if it's not connected to the ruh, it tries to connect you to earth. And that's the difference between awliya al-Rahman wa awliya al-Shaytan. And the awliya of al-Rahman, their mind is more connected to their ruh, and the awliya of al-Shaytan, their mind is more acting independently and contrary to the ruh, and trying to over-philosophize or to philosophize or intellectualize and rationalize evil in doing so. But you are a human being by your soul before your mind. And that's why the little babies, the infants, everybody agrees they're innocent. It's the innocence of the soul that's still manifesting. Because the mind, when the mind wills for things evil to be done, that also brings a ramification to you immediately. That shows on you, that lives around you, that affects you and affects your surrounding. And that's why this innocence decreases as people grow. But then this innocence increases with the awliya of Allah. So they grow back to innocence, notice? And that always has to do with the sin. Yesterday we talked about Adam, when the sin was talked about in the Quran, or let's say the disobedience, and that relative sin, once that disobedience happened, they were exposed. Before, they lived in Jannah and they ate and nothing would happen, no exposure. They didn't have to look for anything to cover. So that sin then removed the innocence of the initial innocence, the original innocence in a sense, but that innocence can be reclaimed back only through two things: tawbah, istighfar, and going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the trip of the human being that we take. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.